I want to say thanks to Tom as well, and a friend called Simon Whitehouse, again who I met through the Gordon Banks project, who introduced my book to Tom, and Tom decided that he would like to publish it. And I really like what Legend Press have done with it. They've actually changed the title of the book. I think they've got the right emphasis. It's a boyhood memoir, and also about a wonderful sporting icon who had a very positive influence on the boy. And of course the person I'm talking about is Gordon Banks. I've been very privileged that Pele and Archbishop Tutu have written the foreword to the book, and in it they refer to my scrapbook, which they loved when they saw it first in Stoke, and they described it what must be one of the greatest tributes any child anywhere in the world created to a hero. My brother Cahill is here today with his family, and I'm very privileged to have him here. But Cahill would have seen me cut many of those photographs out lovingly from newspapers, from magazines, from books. I even used to go into libraries because we couldn't afford books, and I'd go to the sports section and look for photographs of Gordon Banks, and if I found one I'd tear it out and hide it, and some of them have found a way in there. And in fact, a number of years later the IRA blew up the library and all the books were destroyed, so I saved Gordon Banks in it, which is interesting as well. And just even as you look through it, there's a couple of interesting things, because I mean, Cahill will agree with me here, and that is we were never brought up bitter people. The Craigan Estate, where I grew up in, or we grew up in, became an IRA stronghold. But in my childhood, there was never any sense of anti-Britishness or anti-Englishness or whatever. And when I was the goalkeeper for our Street Lane Gardens, after I discovered my hero Gordon Banks, I donned a yellow jersey, but I wasn't satisfied with that. I needed 3 lions, and I remember searching Derry and finding 3 lions, and my mother sewing the little badge on, so because I wanted to be the England goalkeeper. So playing in this street team in the Craigan, and no one ever said anything. And what's really interesting too, I had the opportunity then to meet Gordon Banks for a second time. My first time was when I was a boy of 14, and it was one of the most extraordinary moments in my relationship with my father, in that Gordon Banks came to play for Stoke City in a pre-season game against Finn Harps in neighbouring County Donegal. And like young people nowadays, because travel is so easy, and you see such a saturation of football on television, won't realise, the opportunity of actually going and seeing your heroes was almost negligible, particularly when you were from a poor family. But the fact that he was coming 30 miles away, and the only expectation I had was to go on the terraces and to watch him. But unknown to me, my father and my mother hid my scrapbook in the boot of the car, and they drove into a hotel, and a couple of minutes later my father came out and he was all excited and he says, "Don, come here, come here." And I walked in, and there was my scrapbook with this tall man with his back to me, leafing through it, and my father spoke the magical words, "Here he is, Mr. Banks." And Gordon Banks turned around, and honestly, all I can say, it was like an audience with God. And I've met some of the great people in the world, thankfully through my work, but nothing other than an audience with God ever surpass just the joy that my father gave me the day that I met Gordon Banks. But what's really important, it was 18 months before Bloody Sunday, which I witnessed as a 15-year-old. And I will never forget the respect that Gordon Banks showed to my parents. And he treated my parents because he saw in my parents his parents. And coming from a very similar background in Sheffield. And after Bloody Sunday, when many of my friends, were drifting toward violence, I kept remembering that moment of Gordon Banks, and the fact that I knew a good Englishman. And Banks was a very strong influence in me not choosing the path of violence, which would have been very, very easy. And when I went back to meet him as an adult a number of years back, I pulled out the scrapbook, and of course a lot of the sellotape had dried, and I needed to use glue to put them back in again. And as I was going through, and I hope you'll enjoy this, let me see if I can find it. This one. Let me see. Maybe it's here. It's not there. If I can't find it out, I thought I put something here to make it easy, but it's got lost. Oh, here it is. You can have a look at this, but when I took this picture to put the glue in it, I discovered my boyhood handwriting. And it was in pencil. And this was written in 1970. And I wrote, "Please God, help England win the World Cup." And you know, well, Banks, of course, and we deal with that in that World Cup. I mean, that save against Pele, of course, has become iconic in football history. But I mean, I write about it again in the book. I mean, was he nobbled? You know, there's even a suggestion that the CIA were involved. And it's very funny when you read it in the book. But Banks was the only person targeted, you know, and he gets very sick. And I think that if he'd been playing in that game against West Germany, who knows what would have happened, because we know that at the end of the game between England and Brazil, which was, again, still remains one of the great classical games in the history of soccer, I mean, Pele went up to Bobby Moore and said, "We'll see you in the final." And England lost it 1-0, but they didn't deserve to lose it. I mean, I think the fairer result on that day would have been a draw. But anyway, there we are. Banks was such a great hero. One of the stories that people love to hear as well is the day that the army came in to raid our house in the Craigan, just when after Bloody Sunday, and like things were pretty bad. And I was alone in the house with my parents, and I remember being wakened up by the sound of these Rolls-Royce engines coming down the street, and the sound of heavy boots running up our steps and banging on the door, and opening the window and being told that I had literally 30 seconds to open the door, and shouting to my parents, "Get out of bed, the army are coming for a raid," and opening the door and being pushed aside, and maybe 12, 14 soldiers coming in, and some went downstairs, some went upstairs, and I followed them upstairs because I was concerned about my parents. But I remember one of the soldiers went into my bedroom, and I followed him in, and it's comical now, but it was actually quite frightening at the time. I remember, you know, whatever was going on in his head, he went into my bedroom and suddenly stopped and he looked around and said, "What's this, mate?" And I think he expected to see like Republican and IRA paraphernalia, and what he saw was photographs of Gordon Banks and Stoke City and England all over my wall. And I said, "Well, Gordon Banks is my hero," and I pulled out the scrapbook and I showed him the autograph that he'd given me in 1970, and he called in the raiding officer, and I'm sure the guy thought that they'd found weapons in the room. And the next thing was there was a queue of British soldiers to see my Gordon Banks autograph, and the raid stopped. It was interesting, and the word came I had to be arrested. I was arrested and taken away, and my mother started to cry. But I remember the officer in charge of the raiding party going to my mother and saying, "I promise you, Mrs. Mullan, I'll make sure nobody will hurt him." And I was taken away, and then just one last funny thing just to finish off with, and that is they held me for about an hour in a place called Piggery Ridge above the Craigan, and eventually then word came that there was nothing on me to let me go, and the officer came to me. He said, "You can go. Do you want the lift home?" And I said, "You must be joking. I said, I'll be lynched if I've seen me dropped off in the British Army." So, but I think that's part of the joy of this book as well, and I think that's why Tutu and Pele loved it as well, because I think it shows how sport can bridge political and geographical divides and help heal the hurts of history. And I dreamed of becoming a professional goalkeeper, playing for my country like Gordon Banks. Sadly, I didn't grow bigger than 5'7", so when I realised I wasn't tall enough, the dream died. But hopefully the discipline I got from sport, the friendships that I got from sport, helped to make me a better person. And I think that, you know, young players today, where there's so much emphasis on money, and like where players are treated almost like commodities and fans like consumers, and even in terms of, you know, the Gordon Banks Monument and the difficulties we've had of trying to bring that into fruition, but we will eventually, and we'll find good people of goodwill, as Tutu and Pele write about in their foreword. I just think it's so important that, you know, people like Banks and some of those great heroes from that era are held up. And I can say that as an Irish boy with an English hero who wants to create a wonderful monument to my English hero, that I was very privileged to have found such a good man and to be considered now a friend of the Banks family. I mean, 6 months ago I got a phone call from Gordon Banks' son Bob to say, Don, I'm a grandfather now, you know, which is really lovely, which means Gordon was a great grandfather. And just to have that kind of intimacy, and also to, because of Gordon Banks, I actually work now with the hospital that Pele's involved with, the Pele Little Prince Hospital. And as a boy in the Craigan, like, where my best friend who died sadly in a car crash, whose hero was Pele, I mean, for Shawnee and I to think that one day that I would be kind of in the inner circle of Gordon Banks and Pele and stuff like that there, I mean, it was unbelievable, and it's just beautiful. But football has given me great memories. And can I just say thanks to everybody for coming. I know that there are people like Paddy Loftus who've travelled the whole way down from Nottingham. There's people from London, people from all over. We have people from Wales with us tonight. We have people, have we any Scots here? I hope so. Is there any Scots here? No?
Cambridge.
What's that?
Cambridge.
Oh well, Cambridge, yeah. Which is a separate part of. Okay, we'll say nothing about that. And we've people from north of Ireland and from the south of Ireland. But also, I'm really pleased to have a great smattering of people, representatives from Mauritius, the island of Mauritius and the Indian Ocean. We have people from Argentina, from Peru. We have people from France. We also, obviously, we have people from England, but I'd like to also point out a very special friend, Shahidul, who is a very modest man, but is a world-class photographer. And in fact, the last official portrait of Nelson Mandela was actually done by Shahidul. So I'm really grateful. And he delayed going back to Bangladesh when he learned of the book launch. And Shahidul, I'm very pleased and very honoured that you've done that. And I'm grateful to my family for coming as well, all of the Mullans who are here tonight. So thank you very much for here, and I look forward to meeting everybody afterwards. Hopefully I haven't forgotten. Is there any other nationalities I've left out? Peru? Did I mention Peru? I mentioned Peru, yeah. So it's really great. All the corners of the world are here as well. So that's wonderful. So thank you again. And also we've just got word that the book is going to be published in Brazil as well, which is fantastic news, you know. Tom, thank you very much.